From the Center for European Reform, this is the CER podcast.
Posons-nous sérieusement la question de l'avenir que nous voulons et ayons tous ensemble le courage de le construire.
Für uns in Deutschland ist das Bekenntnis zum vereinten Europa Teil unserer Staatsräson.
A strong united Europe is a necessity for the world because an integrated Europe remains vital to our international order.
This is the moment for Europe to lead the way towards a new vitality.
Hello and welcome to the CER podcast. My name's Sam. I'm one of the senior research fellows here, and today I'm going to be talking with my colleague Elisabetta about the European Union's new Fit for 55 package and what's in it. Elisabetta, are you excited to be talking about this?
Very much, and I'm also excited you didn't make the joke about it sounding like a fitness program, so that's great.
I left that to you. So
oh yeah, great. I self-annoyed myself with that comment then.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so Fit for 55, not a fitness package. What's it all about? What's in it?
So it's actually a very big deal in terms of policy progress here, because it's true that the EU managed to achieve convergence from the Commission, the European Parliament, and the member states on the long-term climate goals for 2030 and 2050 about a month ago, passing what is called the European Climate Law. And so that sort of enshrined as a legal obligation the agreement to achieve a reduction of greenhouse gas emissions by 55% at least in 2030 with respect to 1990 levels, and to make Europe a climate neutral continent by 2050. But, that was just setting the goals, which was, of course, politically challenging. But then once having set the goals, what matters really is to set the path to achieve those goals. And for that, you need credible policies. And so that is really what this package tries to do. And in fact, it's a lot of policies. It's about 13 proposals covering
13.
13, yeah, no less.
Some would argue that's too many proposals for you to have to read in a week before doing this podcast.
I'm sure that was that was the rationale, but no. I mean, I think jokes aside, I think there is a serious rationale also for putting all of them on the table at the same time to show that this is really sort of a whole of economy effort here. It's not just about, let's say, electricity generation. It's not just about energy efficiency. There is a lot more. It covers, as I said, virtually all sectors of the economy. And I think at the same time, the idea behind tabling all these policy proposals at the same time and having, I think, 7 commissioners around the table at the press conference, given we're into numbers, shows also how comprehensive and how much of a silos breaking, in a way, I guess, exercise pulling together this package must have been, and still has to be if the package needs to become a reality.
Yeah, so I suppose we don't really have time to comment on every piece of regulation, but looking at this in the round, what would you say the key objectives of the package are, and also what are the sort of key areas it focuses on?
Yeah, so I think the idea of this package is to accelerate decarbonization and to make basically the 2030s the decade in which the EU changes the pace of its climate action efforts. And so to do that, I think we can probably identify, I'd say, at least 3 sort of broad objectives. The first one is cleaning up heavy industry, as well as transport. The second is involving households in the energy transition. And the third is creating an efficient as well as clean, as in decarbonized energy system. So these, I think, are some broad headers which can be helpful in trying to group together and analyze the many proposals that are contained in the package.
I'd probably add a fourth, and this is due to my area of interest, and it's the CBAM, right? The Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, in the attempt to level the global playing field unilaterally. And I think that's probably not something we're going to talk about too much now, but we wrote an insight together on this about a few days before the final package was announced, which I would very much suggest people read, because not so much has changed, a few tweaks here and there, but I think our general concerns and suggestions remain the same. But going back to sort of the broader package, decarbonisation in heavy industry in the EU is something that has lagged behind for a while. Would you say this package is attempting to address that? Is the Commission planning to reverse that trend?
I would say so, yes. And partly also CBAM is a part of that effort, right? In the sense that let's go step by step. So first of all, why is it that heavy industry has been a bit lagging behind? Carbon emissions from the heavy industry sectors, think, iron and steel, cement, chemicals, and so on, are covered by the European Emissions Trading Scheme. So there's a cap on the total amount of emissions which are allowed to these businesses, to these manufacturers. And there are allowances attached to emission permits. Now, what has happened until now is that heavy industry, to maintain competitiveness with respect to foreign producers who, for the most part, really are not exposed to price signals, to carbon prices, have been receiving these allowances, so essentially these rights to emit greenhouse gases for free. And so, of course, this is a free lunch, and that didn't provide great incentives for innovation, for cleanup, for decarbonization to heavy industry in the first place. So what the Commission is now trying to do is, as a first, step, to tie the amount of free allowances that plants can receive to the decarbonization efforts they put in place. So introducing an element of conditionality there, together with a timeline for their phase out, which is in any case in place. And secondly, I'd say also replace this kind of inward-looking measure to avoid carbon leakage and to create a level playing field, as you said, with foreign producers. Replace that with an outward-looking one, an international-minded policy proposal, and that is the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, CBAM, meaning that rather than shielding your own domestic producers from the carbon price, what you're doing is that you're starting to expose them to it, but you're also requiring foreign producers who export to the EU to face the same price, because the CBAM allowance price is going to be tied to the ETS one. So let's say, in a nutshell, that's the reasoning behind it. I would say there's also another attempt for a step change in speed of decarbonization of heavy industry, and that is trying to boost innovation, really. And that is done partly by increasing the funds associated with the so-called innovation fund, which receives part of the revenues from the ETS and transfer them to innovation proposals that have to be competitively sort of bid and won, alongside the introduction of additional policy instruments to support innovation and to support low carbon investment. Things like carbon contracts for difference, which try and guarantee investors a fixed carbon price in the future, so that they have the level of certainty that allows them to make sure that their project is going to be bankable, and thus take the leap and start making a concrete effort in decarbonization.
So one of the things I've sort of noticed in the press coming off the back of this package is some internal member state controversy or wrangling about this idea that pricing and the emissions trading system in particular is either going to be extended or a new version of it's going to be created, but it's going to start, in doing so, to target more consumer-facing bits of the economy. So we're thinking maybe about transport, and there's been a bit of a backlash on this already. Could you sort of give a bit more information on this and just explain to me what's going on? So
what has happened until now is that essentially the emissions trading scheme, so carbon pricing, was only affecting big businesses ultimately, right? Heavy industry, electricity generators, to some extent aviation for domestic flights. So this meant that carbon prices were only very indirectly reaching consumers. What's changing now is that the Commission has proposed to create a new ETS that covers road transport and buildings heating. So these are two sectors which are very much close to consumers, which are active parts.
So it would be a new one. So presumably
Exactly.
It would have its own carbon price separate from the original ETS.
Yes, that's the idea, considering that the current ETS, the one that's been in place for about 15 years, I think, has now reached quite substantial carbon prices with an impressive run-up, I think, in the past 6 months. We're about 55 euros per ton of carbon. And so, on the other hand, introducing a separate ETS allows for a more gradual build-up of a carbon price covering consumer activities, such as driving ultimately and heating. So what does this mean, though? I mean, I think already before the proposal itself, there was a lot of discussion both within the Commission and very vocal MEPs as well as member states already sharing their doubts around it. And this all boils down to the fact that putting an explicit carbon price on these activities, on one hand, it certainly provides a very clear incentive to reduce the consumption of fossil fuels, those you put in your tank and those you use, let's say, through a gas boiler to heat your apartment. But on the other hand, it also has a very clear and stronger impact on more vulnerable lower income households who spend already, begin with, a higher proportion of their income on this type of basic needs services, right? So while, let's say, from the environmental point of view, the rationale is there, and it is the most efficient way to try and encourage behavior change and shifting away from fossil fuels and towards alternatives, such as heat pumps at home or electric vehicles or for transportation. The short-term distributional impacts are clear and are very, very much on the mind of everyone involved right now. And this is really what has, I guess, amplified the discussion that you were mentioning before and the fears of all stakeholders involved. Now, this is one of the many flashing points, I think, of this policy package. And while I think it's very important, not to try and hide and not acknowledge the fact that there will be uneven impacts from this kind of price increases on consumers, I think this can be, and we know that this can be offset and this can be handled and can be really cancelled out through careful use of revenues from ETS. So, and this is something, in fact, that the Commission has proposed together with the introduction of this new ETS. Meaning what? Meaning that part of the revenues from this new ETS would go into this new thing called social climate fund, and that would basically be oriented to try and address energy poverty, so to try and provide income support to the most vulnerable households who are, having a hard time with temporarily higher energy bills.
Great. So we've talked about heavy industry, we've talked a bit about transport and buildings, and we've talked a bit about, I suppose, just transition is the phrase that gets used a lot when we discuss sort of how to deal with the inequities inherent to such pricing measures. But what about the energy system itself? I presume this package does have some new targets or new objectives there as well.
Yeah, definitely. So we have, I'd say, while what we've discussed so far is really about introducing new types of measures, groundbreaking ones, in fact, CBAM, the new ETS. When it comes to the Renewable Energy Directive and the Energy Efficiency Directive, what we are seeing is sort of an upgrade and a strengthening of rationales, which were in large part already there in previous policy efforts. So we see a more ambitious target when it comes to deploying renewable energy, trying to achieve at least a 40% share of renewables out of the total energy mix at EU level. And we also see that finally the EU has decided to make its target for energy efficiency improvements a binding one continent-wide. And this is going to translate into indicative, but still important national level objectives to try and get a broader and more important, a clearer and numerical incentive to member states to try and up their efforts to increase energy efficiency across the economy. So in industry, in transport, but I would say most importantly in buildings. And this ties, I guess, with one of the biggest also policy proposal that we've seen in the past year, the renovation wave, which tries, I think, to tie the challenge of recovery by trying to boost the, employment in the construction sector, following sustainability rules, and with the aim of increasing the energy efficiency of buildings, and so improving the comfort of households when they're at home, and reducing energy bills through better insulation of buildings. So these are, I'd say, the challenges in the energy efficiency sphere. There's another tricky bit, I think, which indicates that, yes, the challenge, I think, in greening the energy sector is not only going to be about achieving higher goals, but it's also going to be about trying to strike a careful balance between climate action, and in this case, the deployment of renewables, and other important political priorities of the Commission, notably biodiversity and forestry strategy. And I think one of the flashing points there is I guess, finding the balance between the importance that biomass has as what is labeled today a renewable energy source, and again, making sure that forestry management is sustainable enough so that we can actually be in line with biodiversity targets.
So we've covered a lot, and you've given a very impressive overview of what's contained within the package. But I suppose the big question is, is this going to be successful? And what needs to happen for this giant policy effort to achieve its goals, which is ultimately, climate, carbon mitigation, and saving the world from climate change.
Yeah, no biggies. Indeed, no, I think it's quite daunting. I think when you look at it, especially in its entirety. And I think we already highlighted through the discussion some of the flashing points and some of the, I guess, the political disagreements that have already sort of surfaced in these days. I think in terms of the elements of success for this package to work, first of all, to be adopted and then to be successfully implemented, are to try and find the balance between the price signals, which are important, and I think they've been behind the success we have had in the past decade and more in starting out the decarbonization of the energy sector. So making sure that the ETS provides meaningful price signals to industry, to power regenerations, to the transport impact actors, which are going to start to be exposed to price signals. We didn't discuss it, but the maritime sector also is going to be embedded under the ETS, as well as, as we said, consumers. There's going to be another sort of price signal generating reform, which is touching up the energy taxes so that they reflect the carbon content of fuels rather than being set more or less randomly. And so all of these needs to be balanced also with, important and ambitious targets, which are partly already there, sectoral targets, which are being proposed with some of the regulations, and member state level targets in terms of individual national goals of emissions reductions. And all these also with some also regulatory interventions to try and make sure that there are some fixed sunset dates for some of the most, I guess, carbon intensive applications. And I think one of the big, I don't know if surprises, but certainly political gambles of this package is also the fact that the vehicle emission standards which are being proposed would in fact translate into the phase out of combustion engine cars, so gasoline and diesel cars by 2035. So here you see the mix between carbon signals and regulatory actions and ambitious targets that needs to sort of be balanced out in a careful way. I think another necessary ingredient for success is, of course, acknowledging and addressing correctly and effectively and credibly from a political point of view the distributional impacts that are involved by the transition and by climate action. And I think we spoke about the distributional impacts between households of different income levels, of course, so let's say within member state impacts, but of course different member states are also going to be differently impacted by these measures. Businesses and households are differently impacted, and they benefit from different timelines when it comes to decarbonization. So that's something to be squared out. And also, I think on the international sphere, something that you pointed to when you alluded to CBAM, I think we need to be convincing also, I think, with our international partners when it comes to sharing the costs of the transition. And this brings me, I think, to the final point and to the final, I guess, prerequisite for this whole thing to work out and to pull off the climate action feat. And that is for the European Union, I think, to shift away from a kind of inward-looking climate action towards an outward-looking and, I guess, internationally climate action effort. And that means, starting to convince other major polluters, such as the US, such as China, to amplify their climate policy efforts, and at the same time, I think, reassure other countries, other trade partners who might be a bit annoyed, if not overall scared by the CBAM proposal, that I think revenues are going to be used also in such a way support their decarbonization efforts and to also meet, I think, the EU pledges for climate finance. So not that much, as you can see, there's quite a bit on the table. Yeah, I guess we'll have to see also in the next, well, maybe in the next weeks. I think Brussels will sort of take a break and go on holidays because this was quite a feat. But I think soon enough we'll observe more political reactions and see, where this is going and what, I guess, counter proposals or tweaks we can expect.
But you're feeling optimistic.
I think overall, I am feeling optimistic because this is impressive in terms of putting some substance on the table to meet the objectives, and it's, I think, a balanced package of proposals. Of course, some bits could be more ambitious. Of course, some bits are politically a bit of a gamble. But if we take a bit of the long-term perspective, I think it's a good mix of policies and it can deliver. Of course, it requires jumping through a range of higher hoops, I guess, for it to work out. So let's see how that goes.
Great. And I'm sure this is something, a topic we'll return to in future podcasts. But for now, I'll say thank you. And I think you could probably do with a bit of a break as well for the rest of the day, given the last week you've had. For those listening, if you have enjoyed this podcast, this episode, or just in general, we would really appreciate it if you could provide a rating on whichever podcast provider you use, so long as it's a good rating. Obviously, we don't want bad ones. And also, if you could leave a positive review, because that very much helps with our placement in the different charts and with attracting more listeners to our little podcast. So thank you very much. And I'm sure you'll hear from us, hear from both of us again soon.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to the CER podcast. If you have any feedback for us or want to leave suggestions for a future episode, then you can find us on Twitter at CER_EU.